Hey everyone, I'm Christina, and I had a really good suggestion from a friend of mine, YouTube uh, subscriber that I have, and she said, we should do the Mike from around the world talks. What he's talked about on Paul Begleys show on Thursdays, because sometimes we miss out, and other times a conversation, and it's kind of hard to keep up. So we're going to go ahead and go over those things because I feel like those updates that Mike gives are really important, and he does drop some pretty cool hints that most people don't really catch. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Christy. Good to see you. And don't forget to hit that thumbs up, share, and we'll go ahead and get started on it right now. Ready? Okay. All right. The first thing that they talked about, there were things that they talked about, and then there were things they would begin to talk about, and they would just stop. Like Paul would just stop Mike. The first thing that they were talking about, you can see there was a lot of questions that Paul had, and so they kind of had to go quick, but boy, were there a lot of questions. He was talking about a governor being taken out of power, something about they couldn't find everybody, planning something for a while. I know that I probably could have done better at the very beginning of this, but I did put the link for the show earlier. But he's talking about certain people being taken out of power, that they wanted to do it, but they couldn't find everybody. They're planning this. It's not just one radical group, but several. And that they're not really radical. They just feel the government's fighting against certain rights, and people are taking justice into their own hands. Militia groups are growing, but they are bloodthirsty and went off the deep end, not quite mentally there, tend to go to the extremes. Former officers that held positions of leadership now directing citizens. They mentioned the name, they called them militias, and they specifically talked about one in Michigan to overthrow, I guess, this said governor. That maybe I didn't write down the name because I've never actually heard of this person. Okay. The second point was Nancy Pelosi gonna try. Is Nancy gonna try the 25th Amendment to say president is not fit for duty or office? Okay. Mike was saying that the legitimacy of this question would be to notify individuals of Trump's prior conditions. They would put a committee to investigate his previous status. Mike Pence could still carry out the duties of the president. Next bullet point, likes certain types of attacks. Speaking of Mike, he likes certain types of attacks because you know where people stand. It's easier when people attack you out in the open, I guess, so that you can see them. And he says that Trump conveys a lot in his speech, and they like to put a clamp on that. We have fights, but we have clarity. And so he's saying that there is good coming out of what seems to be just nothing but nonsense. Basically, he's saying there is sense to be made of it. Good morning, Jeff. Good to see you. It's easier to kind of do a live stream in here today because we're getting the west side of Delta, so it's not so sunny. Okay, but we want to keep on track. I don't want to get off on a tangent. Okay, now he said something ominous next. He said Earth is close to one of its biggest changes ever, going into a new type of existence. And this is where Mike is stopped for the first time. I mean, how do you say something like that and then just, oh, stop, Mike. Oh, we gotta talk about this thing over here. But I mean, Earth is close to one of its biggest changes ever. So you kind of have to wonder if he's going to try to speak about that again, specifically. Going into a new type of existence. Isn't that kind of scary to hear? Okay, so Paul, he redirects the conversation very quickly to asteroids, and he's talking about asteroids that have been over Ohio, Pennsylvania, Brazil. One exploded over Mexico, and he goes, will it get worse? And Mike says, yes, way worse. It's just now beginning. We're getting into a time that information is life and death critical. This is a telltale year that people will see. And I'm thinking, what, till the end of December or like for the next 12 months? He says impacts on the face of the earth. And So he's not talking about one impact. He's talking about impacts. Okay. And he talks more about that later. And, that kind of reminds me of the movie Greenland, the one with Gerard Butler. I always called Gerard Butler my TV boyfriend. I mean, not that we'd ever dated, but, I was like, that's my boyfriend, But don't worry, we broke up years ago. Well, in reality, but, still just thinking about that movie about impacts, which I really need to get back to the point, right? Let's just check comments real quick. Yeah, I think you're right, Christy. I think the Earth's about to rock and roll too in phases, because I think that we've got a great shaking coming, but I also think after that, at some point, we're going to have a pole shift, the crust roll. So I think there's going to be a series of earth-shaking events. Okay, so he was talking about impacts on the face of the earth, going into times that are flat out deadly. What is coming in will affect everything we ever knew. God is breaking us from our dependency from, he talked for a minute, but I realized he was talking about man. God is breaking us from our dependency from man. Then the next point was about underground bunkers, colony on Mars, cluster of asteroids, Jupiter collision, 5 waves of energy. They just kind of rattled all that off at one time. And Paul asked, are we coming into that time in prophecy? Mike says, oh yeah. Energy waves continue to pour into our solar system, causing the core to swell. Heat plumes underfoot. Land masses are largely unstable. Marshlands unstable, continental shifts and cracks, new fault lines forming all over Earth, new fault lines. Earth is continuing to destabilize, radiation coming from space at unbelievable levels no one has ever seen before. We will see in months cracks in highways, cracks in roads. And he said to watch for people trying to repair roads that were recently repaired, and then you'll know, okay? He also said that insurance companies are paying close attention to this silently. People's foundations are shifting. And if y'all been watching my channel at all, y'all will know that I've been telling y'all what recently, Shaking Earth from the Heavens, that was a live stream we did recently. I've done videos before talking about what has happened to Earth, what we're to expect. It was on these magnetic levels and the pole shifts, so y'all would know that, I already know all of this. This is coming. This is absolutely right. I've been watching for the splitting of America and the tectonics under Texas too. So he's saying that all of these things I've been talking about are about to hit a peak, and when you talk about heat plumes underfoot, to me that I just think about California on fire, land masses largely unstable, marshlands. Do you remember when we were just seeing lots of trees sinking into the Louisiana bayous, just sinking in, yeah. Okay. So they went into some weird side conversation about can't build an underground supersonic transportation system under West Virginia. I really feel like that came, but I think it had something to do with how unstable the ground is underneath us right now, because it is. Small projects all over the U.S. to cover up what they've already done. Example, going to Mars. They went into a conversation about how it wouldn't be the first time somebody's been to Mars that they've basically established a colony. And so they're looking to establish a secondary sect of people there, favorites of the elites. They've already sent many, many probes, spent a lot of money. And they were talking about how Lauren Eisenhower, and a lot of you might have heard this, she's been talking about how she was recruited for a dark space Mars program and turned it down, which I think was smart. But then Mike started mentioning space agencies. A lot of these I'd never heard of when I looked them up. A lot of these I really didn't find anything on them, but he mentioned, and it went so fast, I'm not sure some of the letters on some of them, but it was DLRA, MUI, ISRO, NARS. But see, NARS, that one was interesting because it's an aquatic research thing, like water. And then there's NASA, which is space. So they're not just looking into space on this, you know. CLIEEAKALSA KCWI. I don't understand any of those letters, and I did try finding them, and I really couldn't. But government does a lot of secret things. Maybe I heard the letters wrong. I don't know. See how everybody's doing. Oh, you're already seeing the cracking with some of that in Alabama? Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's good to know. I mean, as far as the information. Hello, Star Sister. Okay. Didn't want to leave anyone out. Okay. Let's go on. Let's finish up. Well, we're not going to finish up right away, but here we go. Mike starts talking about leaders that have made certain declarations. He's referring to the deep state. President Trump is in a difficult position to make decisions that no one can understand. He's basically saying that there's something going on behind the scenes that we won't make much sense of, but he can't really talk about it. Very sensitive issues. Will he fold or continue to strive in certain directions? He has to be careful, even if it looks strange sometimes. Next bullet point. He says brand new type of government will be formed. What? And they just kind of skim over this, but I'm like, wait, what? A brand new type of government will be formed. Like, we need any more nannies. But I mean, beyond that, it's like, what is this type of government for? Is it going to replace the one? I mean, what were we talking about? Martial law? What is no, that's not exactly new. But I mean, I'm saying, what new type of government? Is that just for America, right? People have a decision to make to break away because they know what is coming. Okay, maybe that has something to do with it, to break away from the system. That conversation abruptly ends, and Paul goes straight to, are we about to see another wave of COVID? And this is when Mike starts saying that COVID is unclear medically, like they don't have quite enough information because it keeps mutating and everything. And he says some viruses you can recover from, and then 7 months later you die. And I'm like, why is he saying that? Should we be watching for those people that seem fine now, and 7 months later, what is that for COVID, or is this for viruses that are coming out in the future? What do you mean by this? You can recover, and then 7 months later you die. He says with COVID, it's unknown. Why are we having such trouble creating a vaccine? Something is not quite right here, is what Mike is saying. Cover up is scratching the surface. Excuse me, I need some President Trump was given an antibody so the virus can't latch onto anything and replicate. But that is only temporary. We won't know his true condition for another 8 days because the body goes through a cycle. They know this too, but Trump is very strong-minded. The other chemicals might cause you to make decisions that aren't clear-minded. Okay, so he wasn't given a vaccine. He was given an antibody. But still, everything is so experimental. Yeah, I can see why they would have to continue to look. But you can die 7 months later. What does that even mean? Okay. And there's more that they talk about a little further down. We'll get to that. But they start talking about militias out to take out a governor. What happens in this country if they're down to the wire and try to remove this guy? Don't you think some of these groups will rise up? He's saying that groups will rise up. No one has stopped the siege. And then they started going, I mean, it's just kind of weird how they darted around in conversation. Nothing was really fluent, like they talk about meteors, just kind of went back and forth. But they went into Amy Coney Barrett, announced as Supreme Court Justice. Bunch of people got COVID. Was something sprayed, is what Paul wants to know. Mike, he says the infection to death rate, this is his answer, 4 million to 200,000 if the numbers can be trusted. And that is not a big death toll comparatively. Trump finds out some of his advisors were traitors in close proximity. And Mike's like, so what? More of us need the virus to become immune to it. I guess. You get it. I'll watch, see what happens with you. It's like, yeah, have fun. Could COVID permanently change or cause brain damage to the president of the United States? Mike responds with, it's possible, is basically what he said, if not handled properly. Could cause a secondary disease, and COVID has done this to many people. Different strands of COVID has been mutating. The longer it takes to get a vaccine, the more it has a chance to mutate. We got to deal with this and figure it out. Other viruses are horrible and they have lost containment. He's not just talking about COVID. He's talking about other viruses. Now they've lost containment. What? Because there are too many people shifting around. If he has underlying conditions, talking about the presidents, and we'll really have to watch for that. This guy is sick. We have to get this guy well. Different DNA reacts differently to the virus. And see, that was interesting because they were also talking about right next that they had the president's DNA before he was elected, so that they can target against certain DNAs if desired. So they're not just talking about the president's DNA, but others, because they can use these viruses to target specific DNA strands, structures, certain families, right? Certain individuals even, right? And that they had been working on this since the 50s. They used to test the populace all the time. They would spray the skies and see which people report to the hospital and write their names down so that they could narrow down the DNA that is most likely to be affected by said strains. Mike has no choice but to get vaccinated, but strongly believes that prayer changes the power over evil intents. Now, I remember in the 90s, like every single year, something horrible and more worse than the previous year for that 10-year period. People were getting sick every fall with just these unbelievable sicknesses that just seemed a little bit different and worse every year for like 10 years. Okay. And narrowing down the DNA for the DNA. The word bioweapons been used a lot. That's all I'm going to say about that. But my question, seriously, is why are they still working on a vaccine if everyone in the hospitals and Mike from around the world are already vaccinated? What is it they're trying to give us? What's the difference? But Mike Pence says that we're close to a vaccine. And then there's a shift in the conversation again. What is going to happen in the next 12 months with asteroids? Mike replies, meteor storms. And he said that a single impact would have been easier than a meteor storm because you're going to have several impacts, right? There's a lot more to watch. He said it will cause fires. And he said this is in the next 12 months. Will cause fires like we have never seen before. Fires always shift patterns when we have more water in the atmosphere. Okay, so it was weird how he went from the impacts to the atmosphere. It was kind of like he just started talking about how the atmosphere is holding more rain, so some places will have more drought, and then other places will have double the rain. Okay, and there was scripture on that. I remember hearing that as a kid. There was, I was so little, but I didn't forget it. So they didn't take very long with the meteor storms, did they? It's like another one of those subjects where it's like, what did you just say? And then they switch subjects real quick. It's like, oh man, let me go ahead and check any comments right now. No, it's not Mike Pence, the guy we're talking about. It's Mike from around the world. His YouTube channel is Council of Time, and he's often a voice on the Paul Begleys channel. So the Mike that I'm talking about, I mean, I mentioned Mike Pence a minute ago, but the Mike that I've been talking about this entire time is Mike from around the world. Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah. All right. So where did I finish up? He says so many interesting things. They get into Hurricane Delta, the 12th storm to hit America this year. And, like I said, we're getting the west end of it right now. I guess it's starting to come in, but, I don't have to water my plants today. Pretty psyched about that. But, yeah, okay. But then they kind of brush along, among locust plagues and other issues like COVID. Then they start talking about an increase in weather phenomenon, which probably had a link to this water in the atmosphere comment a second back. But Mike said everything has a flashpoint. Eventually, the earth will crack under the weight, and that is what is happening. Roads, highways, lakes draining, crazy, right? Cracks in Mexico opening up. Matched phenomena on Mars. Now, this was interesting. He was saying that a lot of the same things that are happening on Earth are also happening on Mars, that this is a solar system-wide issue. He said that the inside of Mars is also heating up, and he said the temp on Mars's atmosphere is heating up. And then he went, whoops, which I figure he meant that he let out a little secret that Mars actually does have an atmosphere. Whoops. But he said that the temps are rising. But he starts talking about the meteorologists and the temperatures. He said you won't get precise temperatures from meteorologists right now. I think I'd mentioned before, I don't know if I mentioned it here on my YouTube channel or if I mentioned it just to my kids. I said, with the magnetic issues we're having right now, you're going to see that the meteorologists are going to have a harder and harder time getting things right, like the weather and the temperatures. And that's where he's saying, go ahead. He's saying, check with your own thermometer. And then Mike is stopped. So something was important there. Okay. And then Paul switches to politics, I guess, with some links. I don't know, but I always feel like every time Paul stops Mike, that something important was just said. And usually my ears are already perked up. I'm like trying to listen to these, and then Paul wants to know about Kamala Harris. I'm like, Kamala Harris and the Green New Deal. So Kamala thinks that the Green New Deal will help. I'm like, no. But Mike from around the world says that libs want us to believe in science instead of God. And that's what he's saying that Kamala Harris is doing. So Paul Begley references 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 20, and paraphrases, and I'm typing, so I didn't get a chance to check. Shut up. But it says, keep that which is committed to thy trust. Avoid these vain and profane babblings. But what Mike, I think, was trying to reiterate is that they want you to stop believing in God and believe in their science, believe in what their computer says, believe in their algorithms. And I think that might have something to do with replacing God eventually, because, we're supposed to be told we need to worship the image of the beast. That's always sounded like quantum mechanics and computers to me. Okay. And what he says next is really just what? Okay. He says, if you think that what the libs are doing is passive, then see what the science believers do next. I don't know if he's talking about libs or science believers, or if they're one and the same or connected. I don't know. But he was saying, wait till you see what they do next. And then he mentions two pods in the earth. Okay. Quantum machines, quantum organisms, whatever you want to call it. That's what he said, is linked into everything on earth and always have been. Mike is stopped again. And when it comes to quantum physics, these quantum computers, they found years back that the quantum computers were speaking in their own language, and they figured out that they were talking to other quantum computers in other parallel universes, right? But they didn't just call them quantum computers. He said quantum organisms. Like there's some kind of Terminator, like, but more of the sense in like, yeah, maybe, like an organism that can use the current of electricity and connect. Because when you think about space, space isn't just about space. Space and time are connected. But he's saying that they've always been here and they know it. And then he was just stopped again. And I'm like, that's really interesting. And then, as usual, Paul wants to know, what bombshell do you want to leave for us for the next 2 weeks? This is when Mike from around the world says, well, in 2 weeks, we'll be in recovery. Recovery from what? Financially, from COVID, from what? And at the same time, I'm thinking, well, in this next 2 weeks, this is when Dana said things were going to start getting really kind of crazy the second, third week in October. So I'm like, there's what you see around you that could happen. But then, that's plan A. Plan B is always God. His plans interrupting plan A, so you can plan all you want, but, we'll see what comes on for that. Mike from Round won't be back next Thursday, but he will be back on the next Thursday, the 22nd of October. So, okay, Mike from around the world has been vaccinated. And he says that he feels fine and that he hasn't had any adverse reactions. And again, well, if he's got a vaccine, and what vaccine are they still working on? And all these other countries are being vaccinated. Okay. All right. Just kind of looking through the chat here, making sure that I didn't miss anyone. So far, we're doing okay over here. Storm's been really light for us, but I'm praying for everybody else out there that Louisiana getting hit in pretty much the same exact spot, and that kind of makes my mind think, what is it about Lake Charles that keeps bringing these storms in this year? I've never really seen one place get hit over and over and over again in one hurricane season. So that's definitely different. And I'm like, what is it about that geology right now? What's happening right there? Because the weather around here has been like a lot cooler than usual, right? And hurricanes are attracted to warmer areas. So I'm thinking whatever it's attracted to has to be underneath. And Mike was talking about, heat plumes underneath the ground. I am in the North Houston area. I grew up around the Crosby, Baytown, Galveston area. Oh wow. Yeah, Lake Charles. They got some amazing food there. But it's a shame that gets hit. It keeps getting hit so many times. Austin area. Yeah, Austin has been Austin and San Antonio were reporting a lot of like gas pocket releases, strange smells a couple of years ago. So I'd be watching for cracks in your highway and roads too, because we always had these gas pockets underneath, but when that gas is released, then it creates empty spaces underneath, and you start having shifting foundations just for that. That's not talking about tectonics even. All right, y'all. We're going to go ahead and end this today, and be sure we're going to say a prayer for everyone in Louisiana. And be sure to share these videos because, I can tell that YouTube is definitely suppressing my channel. They're not really, like last time, they didn't even let anybody in the comments section. A lot of people, they didn't get notified that there was even a live stream until it was 28 minutes later, And how do you have 1,500 subscribers and only 8 people get on there? I was having like 1,000 or more watching my videos up until about a year ago, and then suddenly it just dropped. So yeah, help me out. Hit like, share the videos. Yep, Star Sister. See, one of best friends' mom and dad are in Houston. Yeah, my dad still lives in Houston and works in LaPorte. Has for since we got out of the Army. 1979. That's a long time. How many years has that been? 40 years? Yeah. Yeah, he's about to retire. All right, everybody. I will be talking to you soon. There's always something going on in the world today, right? Thank you very much for coming. Bye, y'all. God bless.